We have developed a hapu data sovereignty statement, and this presentation and everything contained within it is an assertion of our hapu data sovereignty. Ngāti Tiipa, we developed our own hapu data sovereignty statement that accompanies the dissemination of whakapapa and whenua information. And I'll read it because you can't see it. The whakapapa information and contents of this presentation is subject to Ngāti Tiipa hapu data sovereignty. Hapu data sovereignty recognises that hapu and whānau data are a taonga and the taonga belong to the collective. This means that individuals do not have the right to copy, digitise or distribute the information, either wholly or in part, including on social media, church databases and genealogy websites. If you are unsure about what this means, you can contact one of us at pātai@ngatitipa.māori.nz. So we preface a lot of the mahi that we do these days with our hapu data sovereignty statement. And that's a really honourable way of acknowledging our tupuna, our forebears, who have gone before us, because we are the ones who are currently standing here today. We can't talk about our mahi without acknowledging our eponymous ancestor, Tiipa. For those of us who might be familiar with the story of Waikato, our heritage, our whakapapa through Tiipa is through Pikiao, down to Hekemaru, Pāua, and Tiipa was his son. This is our starting place to acknowledge our connection, our whakapapa and whenua, connections to people and place. The whakapapa of our eponymous ancestor Tiipa, the son of Pāua, he was born between 1650 and 1670, which might sound like a long time frame, but this is what the data has enabled us to share. We haven't been able to pinpoint that more accurately. His whakapapa lineage is Waikato and also of Hauraki, through Marutuahu, Tamatera, Taharua, and his mother Tukutuku. Tiipa had 5 daughters, Pare Tiipa, Kauahi, Te Kura, Naho, and Kopa. We are descended from Te Kura. We are one of the Panekoti line, who lived in Te Puaha o Waikato. This is the whenua that a lot of our research has tied to, and this is the whenua where a lot of our whānau still reside today. We are part of the hapu of Te Puaha o Waikato. This map is taken from around 1866 and shows the Opuatia block of around 45,000 acres allocated to Wata Kukutai and his tribe by the Compensation Court, set up after the land confiscations of around $1.2 million, which we know as the Waikato Raupatu. Ka pai Siri, I'll try and help you out. Less than a quarter of this land was subsequently returned, and including to Ngāti Tiipa, as shown in the red circle. It spans from Pututaka, which is at Port Waikato, as we call it today, and across to Mercer, which is just to the right or the middle of the slide. We are 3 marae, Ngā Tairua in Tuakau, Te Kumipa in Tekohanga, and Tauranganui, also in Tekohanga. Our journey has been through several projects, and so in terms of the mahi that we've been involved in with tikanga and technology, we just really wanted to acknowledge that our mahi started back in 2018 in project number 1, and Heeni's going to take us through what we did through that project. Then we also had a second project, E Koreo e Ngaro, and Ella's going to speak to that and introduce the mahi that we've done here as part of tikanga and technology. And then also Vanessa will share some of the briefs that we have published. So again, with the timeline of our projects, Counting Our Tupuna was really the foundation project where we looked to digitise our whakapapa and whenua information from around the motu and build our tupuna database. Through E Koreo e Ngaro, we've explored how to develop frameworks that would fit for our whānau and our hapu as Ngāti Tiipa. And then through the Tikanga and Technology Project, we've actually assessed our whakapapa approach and also our technology approach against the Māori Data Privacy Framework that was shared by Tahu earlier. So hopefully we'll give you all a good insight into our mahi as we go along. So kei a koe te wāhine.
Inga mana i ngā reo i ngā karangatanga maha tēnā koe te katoa. He uri o Ngāti Tiipa, Ngāti Paua, Ngāti Pakeao, ko Heeni Kani ahau. E noho ake au kei te kohanga, kei te kumipā, ko au tētahi whānau hei noho ki tēnei rōpū, te tira rangahau o Ngāti Tiipa no reira tēnā koutou. Want to talk about counting our tupuna, and our journey began in 2018, and it was a major project, and it was called Counting Our Tupuna, which was funded by the Marsden Fund, thanks to Tahu. It was a three-year program that focused on bringing our whānau together to look at whakapapa, to gather information on Ngāti Tiipa tupuna between 1750 to 1900, and to collect data on our whenua. This was to build tupuna in a whenua database owned and controlled by Ngāti Tiipa for our future generations, where the access and the use of databases are governed by tikanga, developed by whānau. This project laid the foundation for the development of a cloud-based pātaka. So, ko tēnei āhuatanga, our approach to this project and other hapu research is not tied to an external entity. It is led by whānau, for whānau, serving our marae and our hapu. A key focus has been building whānau capacity in rangahau and data and kaitiakitanga to ensure our mātauranga remains protected and accessible. With this approach, we assert that Ngāti Tiipa uri are best placed to collect, steward, analyse and disseminate our data information and mātauranga. We have also drawn on the expertise of other researchers who have greatly contributed to our vision and our projects. This slide actually looks at providing an insight of the data pai ki te kōrero i te reo ni. Kore te pēnei ahua. Provided an insight to data repatriation process. Our whānau research team dedicated countless hours to identify and digitise data from public repositories. Here we focused on primary sources in the public spaces. We had located and digitised relevant information, for example, list of owners in the Māori Land Court, or if the material was already digitised, we obtained a copy. We had whānau, particularly our rangatahi, who had engaged behind the scenes to assist in the tira. And depending on the source and type of context, we transcribed or indexed key terms, although there was still much work to be done in this area. Where sources contained direct whakapapa information, for example, name of tupuna, residence and date of death, we added it to our database, particularly the whakapapa database. Initially, we used off-the-shelf package, but we plan to develop our own database based on the Ngāti Tiipa concepts. Kei roti tēnei āhua, whakaahua i ki te tā mātou kaumātua koro karu kukatai, nāna te kaumātua ko ia te whakapapa ninja ni. Ko tētahi atu kaumātua kei muri nei i mau i te pōtai, nāna te tino rangatira kei te kumipā, nāna i whakahaere, nā rātou i āwhina i taki i a tātou i te whakahaere o ngā tikanga. Tino koe o rātou whakaro, aha po tino kaumātua rātou, pērā te haumarutanga ki o tātou tira, hei tiaki, hei manaaki o tātou whakaro. Ko te whakāhua kei Raraunga, nā tātou, tētahi atu kaumātua I haere kei archives, kei tāmaki, e pai ana ki te noho nei, kei reira, kia tiro haere I ngā pipa tawhito, tino a tāhua I tērā haerenga mō mātou. Mō tēnei āhuatanga, our tira had to decide and look at ways how we could project at a grassroots level, how we could kind of engage with our whānau, that it wasn't too explicit, that the kōrero was the content that they could engage in. It wasn't really important that our whānau could look at a concept as such and find themselves in it without being with pēnei āhua. So therefore we currently established our Ngāti Tiipa cloud-based digital pātaka. It was developed by our hapu technologist, Vanessa Clark, and our Ngāti Tiipa technology framework is likened to a pātaka, a storehouse of knowledge structure as a layered system. Our data system consists of 4 interconnected layers, and the first one, te mea tūtahi, is the digitised data layer. This is the foundation comprising digitised extensive hapu-related information from government archives, libraries and online sources. We have collaborated with data scientists to develop a bespoke hapu-controlled data tupuna database using open source web trees software. Ko te mea tuarua, ko te pātaka, we encounter the pātaka or storage layer where the data is securely stored in Aotearoa with a long-term goal of transitioning to a Māori-owned server. Ko te mea tuatoru, ko te tikanga. This layer is to ensure that data governance and management aligns with Ngāti Tiipa values and principles. And finally, applications. As part of an ongoing endeavour, we are actively developing our Ngāti Tiipa website and web-based applications. This includes integrating third-party services and establishing a privacy policy covering terms and conditions, mātauranga Māori and IP, and all guided by Ngāti Tiipa, Tikanga and Kawa. I ngā wā I hanga I tēnei āhuatanga, e noho nei kei wangani o tātou whānau, he wānanga tekau ngā wānanga I tūai, nā rātou hara mai ki te kōrero, heha te tikanga, heha I ngā kawa, e pāna kia tātou I te tira, ki te haere ki mua. So, by whānau, for whānau. Ko tēnei, so quite a series of marae wānanga. And so now that we have repatriated our data into care, we must be the best kaitiaki that we can. We need to establish tikanga and kawa to ensure we have data protection and privacy. So we have led the marae wānanga, and we have defined what is comfortable for our whānau. We have explored what are we not comfortable with, and that's all been determined by our whānau, and what kind of data has been collected, what can be stored in our pātaka, and how we're going to be classifying and using tagging systems and naming conventions. A lot of our whānau that have been attending our wānanga have not as much information or knowledge around how data is used and accessible, and through these marae wānanga, our whānau wānanga, they've actually understood the power of data and our responsibility to protect what we can, what is tapu, what is not tapu. So in our pātaka, we build a tikanga structure across the framework that is multi-layered and deeply connected to Te Ao Māori. We are guided by the Indigenous and Māori data sovereignty framework. We've aligned some of our mahi to the mana Raraunga and the Māori data sovereignty network. So by embedding our tikanga into our digital systems, we ensure that Ngāti Tiipa maintains sovereignty over all our data and that serves the needs of our people now and into the future. I mua i te kia COVID, i mautoni i te tira, i ngā kōrero e pāna ki ngā whakapapa, ki ngā whenua, ngā kōrero tuku iho o ngā tūpuna. Kei tērā wā e noho ake tātou i te motu, kei te kāinga, i noho te tira, ki te mahi ana i ngā mahi e pāna ki o tātou tūpuna. And so what we did was we launched a book from all the data that we had. COVID came, and there was no way of holding our wānanga, so everyone in our tira contributed to having that information and writing our stories by us. And this is part of a tira. This is an intergenerational. We have a father, daughter, we have mothers and daughters, we have a brother and sister. And so this has been the core group of our tira. Kia ora. So, i te mutunga o tēnei, i tukuna atu te raku ki a koe i ala, ki te haere tonu mo tēnei whakātu. Tēnā koutou.
Tēnā koutou katoa, tautoko hia ngā mihi kua miha. He uri tēnei ngō Ngāti Tipa, ngō Ngāti Pāo, Ngāti Tamo, ko Ngāti Mahanga, ko Ngāti Paraukuki, ko Ela Pēpi Tarapa-Dewes ahau. Kia ora. So, with the introduction of Project 1 that Heeni has provided for us, it was focusing on the past. So our research isn't just about that, but it's also looking ahead into the future. So our second project, which is called E Kore au e Ngaro, ran from 2021 to 2022. And ko te tino nako o tēnei rangahau, me ki hea te tino kaupapa, hea te hohonitanga o te whakapapa kia ngai mātou ko Ngāti Tipa. So we're really fortunate to be funded by Ageing Well from the National Science Challenge project. And at the heart of this was answering this question around what is the significance of whakapapa for intergenerational wellbeing for hapu and for iwi. And so we've collected this large range of data, and just picking up on what Heeni and Vanessa have said is how are we to be the best kaitiaki of that data, particularly when we're all related. And so what you can see up there on the screen is an example of, and particularly in the middle image, it is the conceptual framework, which we call the Ngāti Tipa whakapapa framework, or we've called it our mana whakapapa framework. This is a framework which was co-developed with our whānau through various wānanga, and we started off with trying to decide why the significance, because sometimes we talk about these things and we know what the significance is, but trying to articulate that is another thing. And so having our various wānanga, this image in the middle is a conceptual framework. And so what that framework does, it helps us to guide our approach to undertaking whakapapa research or doing any inquiries into research. And a lot of our whānau members have whakapapa data in their houses and homes and whare in their different places. So this is a framework that can be applied not only to our digital pātaka, but it was also designed so that the whānau were wanting to undertake their own research that they could use this. So another part of the E Kore au e Ngaro project was also looking at our tikanga and kawa within the digital realm. And so our goal was to translate our traditional notions of kaitiakitanga and then bring that into our own data ecosystem. So it addressed specific areas, and I think Heeni had some slides there. So in those slides, it was looking at data classification, looking at what are the types of tags that we're going to attribute to our different types of data that we'd had collected, and to make sure that we are providing the provenance. So if we think about museums when there are a lot of data, the narratives that we have are very different to the narratives or the information that a lot of our whare have. And so I'll just talk very briefly around a concept that was investigated, which was the looking at the practical application of tapu and noa. So Tahu talked about this briefly this morning about the importance of tapu and its need for the safeguard and protection of our data. And Linnell also talked about some examples of having a continuum of the classification of data. So in our work we've looked at tapu and noa. And the reason why we've looked at this is because with our data that we've collected, there are some data that's quite sensitive. So as an example, we've been able to access coronial records of some of our rangatira, mai rano, and ko ngā kōrero kei roto nei he honu he mamai. So that's an example of data that we may classify as being tapu. And then at the other end of the spectrum, we may have in the middle of the spectrum is where everyone can have access to this. So for example, census data, which is accessed publicly. And then there's anyone, ko tātou katoa tērā, anyone will have access. So in the pātaka that Heeni had introduced, the top layer of our layered cake were applications. So we are currently building a website, and the data that will be used for that will be content from our taonga book that we had presented. So he mihi tēnei to the funding by the Ageing World National Science Challenge. Nā reira, koe ara, kia ora.
And this morning, as we heard from Tahu and we heard from Linnell, we've been focusing on data and governance, and our particular research aim has been around collective privacy for collective benefit. We have our Kahui Kaumātua advisory, and we also have the Māori Data Privacy Framework as one of the kete mentioned earlier. And we wanted to do 3 things. We did 4 things, but we just try to trim that down to do 3 things well. And we're going to now speak about those. So I'm just looking at Tahu for a quick time check. We might only have another 5 minutes. Yeah, kapai. And so I'm going to invite Vanessa Teague to come and speak to brief number 2. So you'll note that brief number 1's not available. So Vanessa, please, nau mai, haere mai. Ko tēnei wahine no te whenua moimoia no Melbourne. Nau mai, whakatau mai. Nau mai hoki mai, Vanessa.
I think Heeni already mentioned the use of some open source software called web trees. And so the idea is people are loading potentially very sensitive family and genealogical data into web trees. Web trees is some software. It's making some decisions about who to display the data to. And then obviously the question is it making appropriate decisions, or is it leaking information that it shouldn't to people who shouldn't see it? So this project included some of the kind of very traditional cybersecurity and privacy analysis. You know, have we made sure that people can't just break into the website and, you know, guess people's passwords and access stuff that they shouldn't when they're completely outside of the community? Have we made sure that we've given appropriate privacy statements, and given that many people might be not necessarily inside Aotearoa New Zealand, have we made sure that the privacy policy is consistent with GDPR and showing that level of respect? So the first layer was just what I would call traditional standard cybersecurity and privacy for basic data protection. But then there's been a second level that is, I hope, really interesting to everyone, which is how do we take this WebTrees software, which was written for a certain set of assumptions and values, and how do we alter it, which we ought to be able to do since it's open source, to reflect the values that have come out of the conversation about Maori data sovereignty. And it turned out that it was mostly pretty good, but there were 1 or 2 really important details that needed to change. And in particular, the software designers had this assumption that privacy rights kind of ended with death. And their conception was that living people had privacy rights, but that as soon as the person was deceased, all of the stuff about them ought to be immediately visible to everybody. And that, I guess obviously to you, was completely inconsistent with the values that the Ngāti Tiipa people wanted to impose. So the question was, how could we try to alter the software to reflect that differing expectation that recently deceased people also deserved respect and privacy of their data, and in particular, to make the information about them visible to their direct descendants, but not to other people in their family tree. And that feature was not a part of the software, and indeed is still not a part of the software as it is at the time. So we looked at how we could implement that, and I think we can, and then we looked at trying to suggest to the WebTrees designers that they might like to adopt this change. And because actually one of the things that I think is really important about this conversation is Maori data sovereignty is a fantastic idea for Maori, but I also think that as a group of people who are pushing back on disrespectful data practices, I think you have a whole lot to contribute back to the wider community. And I was really hoping that this insight would be something that the rest of the open source community could kind of get on board with and adopt, that could then potentially benefit lots of other people as well as Maori. So we suggested it to them. They completely ignored us, but at least we can do it ourselves.
Thanks, Vanessa. So when we looked at the assessment of our layer cake approach to the Māori Data Privacy Framework, in particular, there were some technology considerations that now reside in a brief. It's about 3 or 4 pages long, and as Tahu said earlier, a lot of our information will be available on the Tengera website to be viewed there. But I thought I'd call out 4 particular examples, and you've heard it through our presentation, mana and authority. Through our technology practices, we're hoping to empower whānau authority over their data, in addition to the collective of Ngāti Tiipa. In terms of tapu, we heard from Ella about caring for sensitive data and using the tapu noa continuum as a practical approach for us to be able to, I guess, classify as something public for general consumption for our whānau who register as Ngāti Tiipa, then what sits behind there, and then connecting them to their direct descendant and caring for the sensitive data that they might encounter on the other side. And then Vanessa also talked about the 3 categories of a person. And so as we look at the WebTrees software, how can we assign the different categories of a person? In the same way, Linnell talked about the Māori Data Code and having specific areas of interest there. Tahu talked about the Māori Data Code and having 3 particular categories. For us, it's about tupuna who were deceased a long time ago, and then we've got people who are recently deceased, and then those who are living. So that's how we're thinking about these things. With Māori, some of the technology considerations for us were about developing a Māori privacy statement. And so there is a good resource that helps all of us today. If you didn't know about it, it's the Office of the Privacy Commissioner. They have a privacy statement generator. And you can plug in your information about not only what you're collecting, but how you're going to protect it. And you can also include references to how you expect people to treat the data. Then we also developed a privacy policy. This was really cool because I like these sorts of things. Well, maybe cool to me. Hands up if you know about GDPR. Oh, kapai. Give ourselves a clap. GDPR is the General Data Protection Regulations that was developed in the EU, I think in and about 2000 and I'd like to say 6. And it's to do with data protections. So we would like to, as Ngāti Tiipa, be a fast follower of the data, of the GDPR provisions for planning in Aotearoa, because not all of our whānau live in Aotearoa. And so if we can take a GDPR approach to the data, then that takes care of whomever of our Ngāti Tiipa whānau might want to access their whakapapa, their tupuna, and we've done it in a way that we're all caring for each other, and hopefully the reciprocity of them caring for what they are shared with comes to light. The second technology thing was around, if we're using cookies, what are the multiple layers that sit within GDPR? So just to rattle them off here, because I know this is tikanga and technology, so for those of you who are technology oriented, we need to differentiate between what are necessary cookies, functional cookies, performance cookies. Does machine learning occur? Are there large language models that are being used? Are we using any of the data for training or data sharing arrangements? Now, we're not, but just to be able to go through and work through the process has been really valuable for us. Similarly, if we're going to use analytics and insights that might be considered, we need to temper this with who benefits. So a lot of us will use Facebook and maybe we'll use Google. There are analytics engines that are running behind all of those platforms all of the time. And so if we were to do that back into our Ngāti Tiipa website and then into our whakapapa database and our whenua database, the question would be, what do we want to know and why do we need to know? It's not about access numbers. It's not about you do a pānui and 5 people clicked on it. It's not about that for us. But in terms of analytics, just understanding who benefits, that was a big question for us. Another consideration for us is the use of Tiipa's image. So the publication Heeni mentioned and the artwork for that was done by our whanaunga Jimmy James Kuratoras, and he was the one holding the baby in the photo. We have got the permission of the artist to use Tiipa's image as some of our digital assets. But when we put whakapapa into our book, we also have taken some whakairo from Te Kumi Pā and put the watermark behind the whakapapa information that we've shared in there. So these are just additional protection measures that we've taken. But when you put it on a public-facing website, well, then we get into this fifth one, which is understanding that wherever we are placing things digitally, how can we minimise the implications of generative AI and the unauthorised scraping of imagery, or parts of the image, the scraping of our photos, music, waiata and so forth. And so in a way, I'm really pleased we haven't launched our website. Because back in 2018, when this was just a pipe dream and an idea, it was like, yes, we can do all of these amazing things. And then COVID came and everyone got really clever with tools. And so we have the AI and the artificial intelligence, and what I'd like to think is we're putting the AI and our ancestral intelligence into our mahi. And that was only one brief. So we've developed 2 other briefs, and I know I'm taking us a little bit over time, but from the first pātai, we looked at the Māori Data Privacy Framework and what were the technology considerations that the framework caused us to consider. Now, if we take a step back and we think about how might the framework be useful for hapu, we answered 3 questions about the data, about the Ngāti Tiipa case study, and about the framework itself. And we were really heartened by the mahi of our kāhui kaumātua, because you know when something is developed by Māori, it feels good, it looks like us, it represents us. Take a look at that image. I'm sure we can all connect to it, and while there are many, many atua, these were the ones that were honed in on in that deep wānanga space for creating the data privacy framework. So we had a lot of confidence when we looked at it, and we'd like to think for other hapu, you will also draw inspiration and confidence from the fact that these kaumātua, I don't know how many wānanga we had, 3 or 4. Oh, we had 5 wānanga. These were morning, daytime, nighttime kōrero for a couple of days each time. And so the depth and the richness of what has gone into the Tikanga, as I call them, mana, tapu, mauri and hau, when you're assessing the framework, or when we assess the framework against whether or not it would be helpful for other hapu embarking on their journey, we were really heartened. And in particular, it's practical and action-oriented, so our kāhui kaumātua did the broad expressions, back to rangitu, ha, and then come back to earth. And then we looked at it and we were like, okay, well, inside the Māori data framework, the mahi of Tahu, Regina and others identified what are the key questions and what are the key directives. So when you hear things like there's a big version, there really is a big version. We looked at that and we looked at the practical ways in which it could help whānau on their own journey. So that's another brief that we've worked on. And then the third one, which is brief number 4. Oh, actually, I'll go back a slide, sorry. The framework, key directives and guiding questions. One of the pātai was, how can the framework be improved? Well, you know, in the very Māori way, you can't make a suggestion and then not solve it. So we made a suggestion and we solved it. And so that was to create a rauemi, a resource with tips to help our whānau embark on their own hapu data sovereignty program. And just know, whānau, once you're in for life. We're trying to tag team now. But these are some of the tips, and again, this rauemi will be available in due course. Get oriented with what's happening in the wider Indigenous data sovereignty and Māori data sovereignty space. We don't all turn up one day and are instant experts. There is a lot of information out there, and if you recall the initial slide that Tahu had showing the stuff, the ID, Indigenous Data Sovereignty Masterclass Workshop, Puka Puka, which is downloadable, we recommend that as a really good place just to get your head in the game, get oriented. But pull yourself out, and then once you're ready to take a kaupapa somewhere, take it to your marae, or take it to wherever your people congregate. It may not be at the marae. And the reason that we think this is an important tip in getting started on this particular type of mahi is that if you can take it back to the people who the data is about, whose kōrero sits inside the data, then you're opening the door for everyone to step inside. They don't need to step inside on the daily, we do a little bit of that. But they just need to know that they have the respect of the research team or the people that want to take the kaupapa forward. And our example is now that on our monthly marae meeting at Te Kumi Pā, we have a bullet line for whakapapa. In the same way we have a bullet for financials, in the same way we have a bullet for our lands trust, but the whakapapa project endures, and so if the whānau doesn't get an update about it, oh, watch out. They're looking to us to provide updates, and so it's become normalised for us to have our kaupapa sitting in there. The third recommendation in here is to create your own version of your data ecosystem map, which sounds like a fancy word, but really when you boil it down, it comes back to what is the data that is most important to you in your kaupapa. And if you can start there, then you can start a conversation. We've suggested consider developing a hapu data sovereignty statement. Our inspiration came from Te Hiku Media. Te Hiku Media received some of the research grant funding back in 2000 and I'd say the 2005-2006 timeframe. And there were no IP statements that recognised the type of work that Te Hiku was embarking on, and they received funding through multiple channels, but what they led with was their kaitiaki licence. And we took inspiration from that. And I'm not sure if Peter Lucas is here yet, but nei rā te mihi kia koutou o Te Hiku. That was our inspiration. So hopefully our inspiration might be someone else's inspiration. And then finally, and there are about 10 tips, but I try to make it short and fit on the slide. Be open-minded when you're making early technology decisions. There is so much technology out there. Everything's fraught with a positive and a negative, but make a choice for your context, for the time, and know that when the time comes, you can make another choice. And so when we started the whakapapa data collection process, Heeni mentioned we used an off-the-shelf software for that. Roots Magic, I think, was the name of it. But we knew that it wasn't going to serve us where we wanted to go, because when you buy something off the shelf, it's very hard to make a recommendation to change the software. And so we looked for some open source genealogy software, and so we landed on WebTrees, which is based off the GEDCOM platform. But even within that, we've encountered our own sets of issues, because you're dropping your idea into an open source community and some will pick it up and some won't. In our case, they haven't, but that's not to stop us doing what we want to do. So again, making early technology decisions becomes really important for how you're going to collaborate with whānau, how you're going to get information out. In the wānanga, our early technology decision was to hand out paper. And Uncle Karu would come to each of our wānanga and stitch the whakapapa together, so much so that it became a Dead Sea Scroll. That was an early technology decision. Old school, effective. So I think in terms of your own tips around how you get started in this particular type of mahi, make a choice. You can always make a different choice the next day. So with that, just in closing, I want to acknowledge our tira rangahau. A lot of them aren't here, but they have entrusted a lot of the good mahi that we do to us few. And we want to also acknowledge those of us who are no longer here. When we started this project in 2018, Tahu brought the kaupapa to our marae. And when we had the first whakapapa wānanga, many of our kaumātua, our ruruhi and koroheke, were sitting there waiting with a bated breath. They couldn't wait. So these are our recent departed. They're with us for all of our journeys as we continue to take the mantle forward. And this is how we'll end our time here, and I know we've gone way over, so sorry folks. But in the book that was published, it was also the title of our presentation. This is from Uncle Karu. Tiipa tangata, tiipa whenua, tiipa te iwi, puea te putai ao te katonga whenua, te wehurua o rātou te aka, te reinga. Hiria he oranga, hei painga mo te iwi, mo ake tonu atu. So that's all from us, and I think it's overdue that we will hand over to the other second case study, which is Nick and Whaimiri. Kia ora koutou.